Imagine boarding a flight, excited for a family getaway, only to be stopped at the gate for reasons you don't understand. For Naomi and Nova Carter, twin sisters brimming with curiosity and dreams, that ordinary moment turned into a nightmare that would change their lives forever. On one side, a seasoned flight attendant named Evelyn Brooks, known for her calm authority and strict adherence to rules. On the other, two young girls and their father, Darius Carter, a billionaire whose influence could move mountains. But power, as the Carters would soon learn, is never absolute, and appearances can be deceiving. In just moments, the airport became a battleground of fear, misunderstanding, and quiet fury. What really happened in those tense minutes before boarding? Was it a mistake, an act of bias, or something far more complicated? And how far would a father go to protect his daughters in a world that seemed ready to judge without hearing the whole story? This is a story of courage, confrontation, and the complicated human heart. A story that asks you to consider your own judgment, empathy, and the price of standing up for what's right. If you're ready to uncover the truth behind the headlines, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Let's dive into the journey of Naomi, Nova, and their father Darius. The air inside Los Angeles International Airport was thick with the restless energy of the holiday season. Families rushed with oversized suitcases, business travelers barked into phones, and young couples clutched passports with nervous excitement. Amid the chaos, two 10-year-old sisters, Naomi and Nova Carter, moved through the terminal with the kind of joy that only children can radiate. They carried matching unicorn backpacks, each stuffed with coloring books, stickers, and the kind of trinkets that mean everything at that age. Their braids, adorned with tiny silver beads, clicked softly with each bounce of their steps. Naomi, the older by just a few minutes but already acting as the guardian, kept one protective hand on her sister's shoulder as they approached the boarding gate. "Grandma's going to be so surprised," Nova whispered, her voice full of awe. Naomi grinned, her eyes shining. "We'll tell her about the Christmas tree at home and how Daddy put the star on top. She'll love that." Their father, Darius Carter, had promised to meet them in London just a few days later, a titan of finance. His life was a blur of boardrooms and flights across continents, but when it came to his daughters, his tone softened, his presence grounded. That morning, before boarding his own urgent flight overseas, he had knelt in front of them, kissed their foreheads, and pressed a special phone number into their small hands. "This is only for emergencies," he had said, his deep voice both stern and comforting. "Not if you're bored, not if you lose a toy, only if something feels very wrong. You understand?" "Yes, Daddy," Naomi had answered quickly. Nova had nodded, eyes wide with the seriousness of the moment. Now, hours later, as they waited at the gate, the girls replayed his words in their minds. But they didn't feel afraid yet. They felt anticipation, the adventure of flying alone, with the care of a designated airline chaperone, felt like stepping into a grown-up world. Their chaperone, a young employee named Sophia Ramirez, guided them through the crowd with practiced ease. She smiled often. Though a nervousness clung to her edges, it was her first time handling unaccompanied minors on an international route. Still, she held their boarding passes tightly, reassuring them with her presence. The boarding announcement echoed over the speakers, muffled but clear enough. Families with young children, first-class passengers, and those needing special assistance were invited to board. Sophia gently nudged the twins forward. Naomi's chest swelled with pride as she approached the gate agent. She held her boarding pass like a golden ticket, ready to prove she and her sister belonged on this journey. Behind the counter stood Evelyn Brooks, a woman whose posture alone spoke of decades in uniform. Her blonde hair, lacquered into a helmet, did not move as she scanned the crowd. Her lips formed a thin, unforgiven line as she accepted the boarding passes. The girls had never seen eyes so cold, faded blue, sharp as glass. Searching. Naomi's smile faltered, though she didn't know why. Nova clutched her sister's arm a little tighter. Evelyn glanced at the screen, then back at the children. Something flickered across her face. Doubt, suspicion. She tapped her nails against the keyboard, each click echoing in the quiet pocket of space around the counter. The line of passengers behind them shifted impatiently. Evelyn muttered. There seems to be a problem with the documentation. Sophia leaned in, her brow furrowing. I don't believe so. Their father booked everything himself. The system confirmed this morning. Evelyn's voice rose slightly, just enough for nearby passengers to hear. The file is incomplete. Consent forms aren't verified. For international travel, especially involving minors, this is a serious issue. She let the word linger. Trafficking is not something we take lightly. The last word sliced through the air like a blade. Naomi stiffened. Nova's lip quivered. The line behind them grew restless. Strangers now staring at the two little black girls caught under the harsh spotlight of suspicion. A man whispered to his wife, "Probably better safe than sorry." Naomi wanted to shout that their father was waiting for their call when they landed, that they were safe, that nothing was wrong. But her voice stuck in her throat. She simply reached for Nova's hand, squeezing it tightly. Sophia tried again, her tone firm but wavering at the edges. Their father is their sole guardian. It's documented in their profile. This is an elite member of the airline he ensured every requirement was met. Evelyn's frown deepened. Status does not override federal regulations. Without notarized proof of sole guardianship or both parental consents, I cannot in good conscience allow them to remain on this flight. She stamped the boarding passes with a loud "denied" and pushed them back across the counter. The sound was final, brutal. Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Naomi felt her cheeks burn hot with shame. Nova's eyes filled with tears, her shoulders trembling as she buried her face in her backpack. Naomi tried to stay upright, her jaw set, but her own vision blurred. Sophia's protests bounced uselessly against Evelyn's wall of authority. The boarding line resumed as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if two children hadn't just been publicly branded as suspicious, as risky, as less than. As the twins were led away toward a cramped service office, Naomi looked back once over her shoulder. The cheerful chime of final boarding call rang out. To her, it sounded like rejection, like the world turning its back. The sisters sat silently in the small, sterile room that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Naomi's hand remained firmly over Nova's, her small frame radiating a determination she didn't fully understand. Nova sniffled quietly, hugging her plush unicorn. They didn't know the rules of air travel. They didn't know paperwork or systems or regulations. But they understood this. They had been singled out, humiliated, and cast aside, and for the first time in their young lives, they felt truly small. The plane hummed with the soft throb of engines preparing for departure. Passengers were settling into their seats, stowing bags, adjusting headrests, and flipping through safety cards. For many, it was routine. For Naomi and Nova Carter, it was supposed to be the beginning of something magical, a story they would tell their grandmother in London again and again. Instead, unease already clung to them like a heavy coat. Sophia Ramirez tried her best to keep things light. She ushered the twins into their seats, buckled them in, and knelt down with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, girls. This will be fine. Sometimes the staff just get extra cautious. That's their job." Naomi didn't respond. Her eyes darted nervously around the cabin. She saw the rows of curious faces that had witnessed their rejection at the gate. She saw whispers exchanged behind raised hands. Her jaw tightened. She was only 10 years old, but in that moment she carried herself like someone much older, as though she understood she needed to shield her sister from the sting of those stares. Nova leaned close, whispering so softly Sophia had to strain to hear. "Did we do something bad?" Sophia's chest clenched. She shook her head firmly. "No, honey, you did absolutely nothing wrong. This is not your fault." But Naomi wasn't convinced. The word Evelyn Brooks had used still rang in her ears. Trafficking. Naomi didn't know exactly what it meant, but she understood enough. It meant danger. It meant suspicion. It meant people looked at them differently because of it. At the front of the cabin, Evelyn Brooks moved with brisk precision, as if her decades of service gave her invisible authority over the air itself. She checked bags, greeted business travelers, and directed families into their seats. But her eyes kept flicking back to row 6, to the twins sitting stiffly under Sophia's care. The unease in her expression wasn't cruelty, at least not in her own mind. Evelyn prided herself on being vigilant. 30 years in the skies had given her more stories than she could count, and she had always told herself that rules existed for a reason. Still, something about the girls gnawed at her. The paperwork had not matched perfectly. The system had flagged the file. In the wake of new federal directives, she was expected to treat every inconsistency as a potential threat. She adjusted her collar and exhaled slowly. To her, this wasn't about malice, it was about duty. Yet duty, carried out without compassion, can look very much like cruelty. As the last passengers boarded, Evelyn approached Sophia. "May I see the documents again?" she asked. Her tone clipped. Sophia stiffened. She handed over the file from her tablet, praying this would finally put an end to the scrutiny. Evelyn scrolled through, her eyes narrowing. She tapped the screen, highlighting an entry. "Here, consent from the mother is unverified. That alone invalidates the authorization." Sophia swallowed. Their father is the sole guardian. That's why his documentation is in the system. There is no mother listed for legal purposes. Evelyn's mouth tightened into a hard line. Then, where is the notarized court order granting him sole guardianship? I don't see it marked as verified. Without that, these children should not be traveling internationally. Her voice had risen again, and nearby passengers tilted their heads toward the conversation. A man in a navy blazer muttered, "Unbelievable," while a woman across the aisle whispered, "How could they let them board Naomi's small hands balled into fists?" Her heart pounded. She wanted to shout that her father had taken care of everything, that he always took care of everything, but the words caught in her throat. She glanced at Nova, who was shrinking into her seat, hugging the unicorn plush until its seams strained. Sophia leaned in closer to Evelyn, trying to keep her voice low. "Look, we're in the middle of the cabin. Everyone can hear you. Please, let's not do this in front of the girls." But Evelyn was immovable. This is a matter of safety. Children have been taken across borders under false paperwork before. If I allow this and something goes wrong, that's on me. I will not compromise. Passengers began pulling out phones. A teenager 2 rows back tilted his camera discreetly. Another traveler shook her head, murmuring, "This is so wrong." The air thickened with tension. Naomi felt it pressing down on her chest, like the entire cabin was shrinking. Nova's eyes shimmered with tears. Sophia was losing control of the situation. Evelyn finally straightened, holding the tablet out as if it were evidence in a trial. "Until this documentation is fully verified, I cannot permit these children to remain passengers on this flight. They will need to disembark." The words struck Naomi like a physical blow. She sat bolt upright, her voice trembling but clear. "But our dad said it was okay. He promised. He said he'd meet us when we landed." Evelyn didn't look at her. She spoke to Sophia instead. "Escort them off." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared openly, and one man muttered something about protocols keeping everyone safe. Naomi's lip quivered, but she forced herself not to cry. She took Nova's hand firmly. "Come on," she whispered, though her own voice cracked. Nova sobbed quietly, clinging to her sister as Sophia rose, her face pale with panic. The humiliation was suffocating. Naomi could feel the eyes boring into her back, feel the weight of judgment from strangers who knew nothing of her life, nothing of her father, nothing of who she and her sister truly were. As Sophia guided them toward the front, Naomi looked up at her, desperate. "Can we call Daddy now?" she asked in a whisper that sounded far older than her 10 years. Sophia hesitated. Torn between protocol and instinct, she nodded quickly. "Yes, we'll call him. Right now." For the first time since leaving their home, Naomi allowed herself a flicker of hope. But, deep down, she already knew what that call would mean. It would not just be a conversation between a father and his daughters. It would be the spark that ignited a storm. At the galley near the exit, Evelyn handed the file back to Sophia with clinical detachment. "I'll notify the captain. They are not to travel." Naomi caught the words. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. She turned her face toward the oval window. Away from Nova's tears, away from Sophia's trembling hands, away from Evelyn's steel gaze. She tried to hold on to the image of her father's smile that morning, his warm reassurance. But the edges of that memory blurred, washed over by the sting of exclusion. Passengers whispered as the twins were led down the aisle, the hum of voices weaving into a low, judgmental chorus. Naomi didn't know it yet, but those whispers would soon echo far beyond this cabin. For now, she held her sister's hand and braced herself for the moment Sophia would press that number, the one their father had given them for emergencies only, the moment that would change everything. The aisle of the aircraft seemed impossibly long as Sophia guided Naomi and Nova toward the galley at the front. The murmurs of passengers followed them like shadows. A few eyes were sympathetic, but most carried the same mixture of suspicion and discomfort, as if the 2 little girls were now something dangerous, something to be wary of. Naomi felt her chest tighten with every step. her hand gripping Nova's so tightly their knuckles turned white. By the time they reached the galley, Naomi's face was flushed hot, and Nova was silently crying, her tears soaking the mane of her stuffed unicorn. Sophia tried to crouch down to comfort them, but Evelyn Brooks stood nearby with her arms crossed, her face a mask of authority carved from stone. "I've notified the captain," Evelyn said briskly. "The children will not be continuing on this flight until the documentation is verified." Her words carried the sharp finality of a gavel in a courtroom. Sophia felt her stomach churn. She wanted to argue, but she had already tried, and every protest had only seemed to harden Evelyn further. "Now," Sophia's voice cracked as she tried again. "Evelyn, please, they're 10 years old. Look at them. They're terrified. Can't we at least handle this discreetly? Without the entire cabin watching?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "If something were to happen, because I looked the other way, the consequences would be far worse than a little embarrassment. Regulations exist for a reason. I've seen too many irregularities swept under the rug. Not this time." Naomi lifted her chin at that, her eyes burning with the effort to hold back tears. "We're not irregular," she whispered, but no one seemed to hear. Sophia led them off the plane, past the staring eyes of passengers who leaned into the aisle to catch one last look. Some whispered words like "poor kids" or "such a shame," but others muttered darker things, cloaked just enough to sting. One man grumbled, "Better safe than sorry. You never know these days." Naomi heard it. Each word landed like a blow. She didn't understand why strangers were suddenly afraid of her and her sister, but she understood the way they looked at them like they didn't belong, like they were trouble. The jet bridge felt colder than the cabin. The hum of the plane behind them was replaced by the sterile buzz of fluorescent lights. Sophia kept glancing at the twins, panic flashing in her eyes. She had promised herself she would keep them safe, but now she was failing them in the most public, humiliating way. They were led to a small, windowless room tucked beside the gate. It smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. The walls were painted beige, their blandness only making the space feel more like a punishment cell than a waiting area. A narrow table sat in the center with plastic chairs pressed against the walls. Naomi and Nova sat down together, side by side, their backpacks still clutched in their laps like shields. Naomi stared at the floor, her jaw clenched. Nova curled into herself, burying her face in her unicorn plush. Sophia paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in urgent, hushed tones to a supervisor. "I'm telling you, everything was in order. The booking was accepted. Their father is a platinum-level member, one of the highest. The system confirmed it. Evelyn she refused." There was a pause on the other end. Sophia's face crumpled with disbelief. "What do you mean you're backing her? She flagged them in the system. She mentioned trafficking." Out loud, everyone heard her. Naomi flinched at that word again. It was like a poison, filling the small room, staining everything it touched. She squeezed Nova's hand. "Don't listen," she whispered, but Nova's shoulders still shook with quiet sobs. Sophia's voice cracked. "No, I don't think you understand. She's placed a permanent note in their file. It says they're flagged for a family services welfare check because of incomplete guardianship documentation. This is going to follow them every time they fly." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "This is a nightmare." She ended the call and turned toward the twins, her eyes brimming with pity. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I've done everything I can. My supervisor is siding with Evelyn. They say she has a perfect record, 30 years on the job. They trust her judgment." Naomi stared at her, unblinking. "So we're just not allowed to go?" Sophia knelt beside them, shaking her head. "We'll figure something out. But right now, I think we need to call your father." At the mention of their father, Nova's head lifted just slightly, her tear-streaked face a mixture of hope and fear. Naomi nodded firmly, as if she had been expecting this moment. "He told us to call him only if it was an emergency," she said softly. "This feels like an emergency." Sophia hesitated. She remembered the sternness in Darius Carter's reputation, the stories whispered among airline staff about his influence, his wealth, his sheer presence. He was not a man you called lightly, but looking at the girls, she knew she had no choice. She pulled out her phone, opened the keypad, and dialed the number scrawled on a piece of paper Naomi had given her. She pressed the speakerphone button. The line rang once, just once. Then came a voice. Calm, clear, steady as stone. "Carter?" The room fell silent. Even Naomi and Nova, who knew that voice better than anyone, felt it shift. This wasn't the warm daddy voice that read bedtime stories and tucked them in. This was the other voice, the one that made boardrooms freeze. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mr. Carter, this is Sophia Ramirez. I'm the airline chaperone assigned to your daughters. There's been a situation." On the other end, silence. A silence so heavy it filled the small beige room like another presence. "Explain," Darius said. Just one word. Not a request, a command. Sophia stumbled through the story, detailing Evelyn Brooks' accusations, the mention of trafficking, the refusal to acknowledge his sole guardianship, and the permanent negative mark placed on the girl's files. Her voice grew more frantic the longer she spoke, each detail more damning than the last. When she finished, the silence returned. 10 full seconds of nothing but the faint hum of the overhead light. Then, softly, dangerously, Darius spoke again. "What is your full name and employee ID number?" "Sophia." Sophia blinked, startled. It's Ramirez. Sophia Ramirez. ID 4729. "Thank you. Sophia, you've done your job. Now, please, put my daughter Naomi on the phone." Sophia hesitated for only a moment before handing the phone to Naomi. Naomi clutched it tightly, her voice trembling. "Hi, Daddy." "Naomi," Darius said, his tone shifting instantly, warmth flooding back. "Is Nova okay?" Naomi glanced at her sister. "She's crying. She's scared. The lady said we're a risk." Everyone was staring at us. There was a sound then, a deep, controlled exhale, the kind of sound that comes from a man who has mastered patience his entire life, but has just reached its very end. Listen to me very carefully. Naomi, you and Nova have done nothing wrong. That woman made a mistake, and I am going to fix it. But I need you to be brave for your sister. Can you do that?" Naomi's throat ached, but she nodded, even though he couldn't see. "Yes, Daddy. Good girl. Now, please give the phone back to Sophia." Naomi handed it over, her eyes shining with a fragile hope. When Sophia raised the phone again, the warmth was gone. The steel had returned. "Sophia," Darius said, "walk back to the aircraft. Go directly to the woman who denied my daughters. Do not speak to your supervisor. Put me on speaker and hold the phone to her ear." Sophia froze. Sir, she's in the middle of boarding a full flight. I don't think do it now. Darius interrupted. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Sophia swallowed hard, nodded, and gestured for the girls to follow her. Naomi and Nova rose from their chairs, their small hands linked, their faces pale but resolute. The moment was here. The call that would change everything had begun. The terminal noise swelled around them as Sophia led Naomi and Nova back toward the gate. The twins walked in silence, their small hands locked together like lifelines. Naomi's jaw was tight, her eyes unblinking, while Nova still sniffled softly, clutching her unicorn plush. The weight of humiliation still lingered, but beneath it now burned something else: expectation. Their father was on the line, and he had promised to fix it. Sophia's pulse hammered in her ears as she obeyed the command that still echoed in her head. Do it now. The certainty in Darius Carter's voice had left no space for hesitation. She carried the phone like it was a live wire, her hands trembling as if it might explode. Passengers near the gate glanced up as the small procession approached. Boarding had nearly finished, the last few stragglers shuffling toward the jet bridge. Evelyn Brooks stood at the podium, scanning her list with the same cold precision as before. When she noticed Sophia leading the girls back, irritation flashed across her face. "What now?" Evelyn snapped, her voice edged with exasperation. "I told you. They are not traveling today. The matter is settled." Sophia swallowed hard, her throat dry. She lifted the phone, putting it on speaker. "Mr. Carter would like to speak with you." Evelyn rolled her eyes, her body language dripping with theatrical disdain. "I have nothing to say to him. My decision is final." She turned slightly, as if ready to wave the next passenger forward. The phone erupted with a voice that silenced everything. "You will take this call." It wasn't loud, it wasn't shouted, but it carried a resonance, a gravity, that seemed to ripple through the air itself. Conversations nearby faltered. Heads turned. Even Evelyn froze, her eyes widening at the sheer authority in that tone. In the brief, stunned silence that followed, Darius continued, "And if you do not, in 90 seconds, the CEO of this airline will be calling you personally to ask why you refuse to speak with its largest private shareholder." The words dropped like thunder. Shareholder. The nearby passengers exchanged startled looks. Someone whispered. Did he say shareholder? Evelyn's face drained of color. Her hands twitched, her clipboard lowering slightly. Slowly, as though her body no longer belonged to her. She reached for the phone. She held it up to her ear with unsteady fingers. "This is Evelyn Brooks," she said. Her voice was suddenly small, a far cry from the sharp command she had wielded only minutes before. "Miss Brooks," came Darius's reply, "cold as ice. You have denied boarding to my children. You have publicly accused them of being a risk. You have humiliated them in front of an entire aircraft. And you have done so based on a policy that my legal team helped draft 3 years ago. A policy that explicitly covers sole guardianship status for executive tier members. Tell me, Miss Brooks, did you verify, or did you simply decide Evelyn's throat constricted?" I was following procedure," she stammered. "No," Darius said, the word cutting like a blade. "You were not. You were engaging in a discriminatory act under the guise of vigilance. You turned a procedural error into a spectacle, and you did it at the expense of 2 children. Passengers around the gate were openly staring now. their phones raised, recording every second. The tide of judgment had begun to shift, the weight of suspicion turning away from the twins and toward Evelyn herself. Evelyn's knees trembled. She tried to stand her ground, but the foundation beneath her had cracked. "I was trying to protect them," she whispered weakly. "You were trying to protect yourself," Darius snapped. "And now, here's what will happen. Flight 27 is not leaving this gate. In fact, no flight belonging to this airline is leaving any gate at this airport until my daughters are safely seated on board. Do you understand me?" The words had barely left his mouth when the airport's public address system crackled to life. "Attention, all global air staff. Effective immediately. We have a temporary ground stop on all departures. Repeat, a temporary ground stop on all departures. Please stand by for further instructions." A murmur swept through the terminal, sharp and electric. Passengers clutched their bags, glancing around in confusion. Gate agents picked up phones, their faces etched with disbelief. Pilots in uniform exchanged urgent looks as radios buzzed with chatter. Evelyn's jaw fell open. She turned, staring through the window at the row of aircraft waiting on the tarmac. One by one, their lights blinked uncertainly, their scheduled departures suddenly frozen in place. The air itself seemed to pause, suspended between shock and awe. "You think you hold power here." "Miss Brooks," Darius continued, his voice relentless through the phone. "But power has just shifted, and you will now correct the mistake you made. My daughters will be escorted back onto that aircraft. They will be seated in the first-class cabin. You will personally serve them their pre-departure beverages, and only when I receive confirmation from them will I allow this airline to resume operations." Evelyn's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Mr. Carter." Naomi stared up at the gate agent, her small hand tightening around Nova's. For the first time since this ordeal began, she saw the fear in Evelyn's eyes. The fortress of authority that had loomed so large had been dismantled in seconds by a voice on the other end of a phone. Passengers whispered in awe. "Did he just shut down the whole airline?" one asked. Another muttered, "Who is this guy?" Sophia's heart pounded as she handed the phone back to Naomi. "Daddy," the girl asked, her voice quivering. "It's okay now, baby girl," Darius said, warmth returning to his tone in an instant. "Sophia will take you back to your seats. A man named Mr. Henderson, the head of the entire airport operation for this airline, will meet you at the door of the aircraft. Give him a big smile. And Miss Brooks, she'll be the one bringing you orange juice. Text me when you're seated. Understood." Naomi swallowed hard, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, Daddy. Good girl. Now go with Sophia." The call ended. For a moment, the silence was deafening. Then, slowly, all eyes turned to Evelyn Brooks. She stood frozen, the phone still in her hand, her posture stiff but her face ashen. She knew her world had just shifted in a way she could not control. Sophia guided the twins back toward the jet bridge. Naomi walked tall. Her chin lifted, though inside her heart still raced. Nova clutched her hand, a fragile smile breaking through the tears on her cheeks. Behind them, Evelyn Brooks inhaled sharply, squared her shoulders, and followed. Every step felt like walking into a storm of her own making. The jet bridge seemed longer than usual as Sophia led Naomi and Nova back onto the plane. The passengers still seated inside watched the small procession with wide, curious eyes. The story had already begun to ripple through the cabin whispers about powerful fathers, about flights being stopped, about the strange announcement over the loudspeakers. Naomi held her head high, trying not to show how much her legs shook beneath her. Nova clung to her sister's hand, still carrying her unicorn, her face blotchy from tears but lit now with cautious hope. Evelyn Brooks followed a few steps behind, her composure shattered but her uniform still neat. To the passengers, she no longer seemed like the stern guardian of the cabin, but like someone walking reluctantly to her own trial. Sophia stopped near the forward galley and turned, the phone still in her trembling hand. She placed it on the counter and activated the speaker again. "Mr. Carter, we're back on board." The cabin hushed instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the rattle of luggage in the overhead bins seemed to pause, dozens of eyes fixed on the small rectangle of glass lying on the counter. "Good," came Darius's voice, smooth but edged with steel. "Now let's finish this." Evelyn stiffened, her throat tight. She glanced at the passengers, then at the phone, then at the girls sitting stiffly in their seats. For the first time in her career, she felt the balance of authority tilt completely out of her hands. "Miss Brooks," Darius said, his words slow, deliberate. "For 30 years you have worked for this airline. You have worn its uniform, enforced its rules, and represented its brand. But today, you allowed suspicion to replace compassion. You turned 2 innocent children into a public spectacle. You humiliated them in front of strangers, and you dared to stamp their names with a mark that could follow them for years." Evelyn swallowed hard. Her knees threatened to give way, but she forced herself to stand tall. I was following protocol. The system flagged. The system did not speak those words into a microphone for everyone to hear. Darius cut her off. His tone cracked like a whip. "The system did not accuse my daughters of being trafficked. That was you. You chose to elevate suspicion into humiliation." The passengers shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Evelyn and the phone. Some filmed openly now, their cameras raised, capturing every second. Evelyn's voice trembled. "I only wanted to ensure their safety, and in doing so." Darius interrupted again. "You stripped them of dignity. Tell me, Miss Brooks, who was protecting them from you?" The question hung in the air like a blade suspended above her. Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came. Naomi, sitting in her seat beside Nova, stared at the woman who had made her feel so small, so unwanted. She felt something stir in her chest, anger. Yes, but also confusion. She had never seen adults argue like this, not with her father's voice booming from afar, not with someone's career seemingly unraveling before her eyes. Darius spoke again, his voice lowering to a dangerous calm. "You will correct this, Miss Brooks, right here, right now, in front of everyone who heard your accusations." Evelyn's lips quivered. "What? What do you want me to do?" "You will apologize to my daughters," Darius said, his tone unyielding. "You will acknowledge that you were wrong, and then you will serve them as honored passengers, not as suspects." Evelyn's hands shook at her sides. In 30 years, she had never been forced into such a public reckoning. Apologies were not part of her vocabulary. Authority had always been her shield. But the shield was gone now, stripped away by a man thousands of miles away whose voice carried more weight than her entire career. Passengers leaned forward, eager, unsettled. They wanted to see the confrontation play out, to witness the rare moment when a gatekeeper was dragged into the light of accountability. Evelyn's eyes flickered toward Naomi and Nova. Nova shrank back against her seat, still trembling, while Naomi's gaze burned with a quiet, defiant strength. Meeting that gaze, Evelyn felt her chest constrict. Slowly, haltingly, she knelt down in the aisle beside their seats. Her voice cracked. "Naomi, Nova, I was wrong. I should not have spoken to you that way. I should not have doubted you." She struggled to force the words out. "I'm sorry." Naomi blinked. She hadn't expected to hear those words. Not from this woman. Not so soon after being made to feel so small. She squeezed Nova's hand, then nodded once. "Thank you," she said softly. The cabin erupted with murmurs, some approving, some astonished. A passenger across the aisle whispered, "Did that really just happen?" Darius's voice returned through the phone. "Now, Miss Brooks, you will escort them to their rightful seats in first class, and you will serve them. Consider it your penance." Evelyn's face flushed crimson, humiliation washing over her like a wave, but she stood, nodded, and gestured stiffly. "Right this way." Sophia gathered the girls' backpacks, still stunned by the unfolding drama. She guided them forward, Naomi walking tall now, Nova clinging close but calmer than before. Evelyn followed with the air of someone walking into a cage she herself had locked. As they entered the first-class cabin, the difference was immediate. The seats were wide, leather gleaming, with plush pillows and warm lighting. The couple originally assigned to seats 1A and 1B were already being relocated, their protests silenced by hushed words from the purser. Naomi and Nova climbed into the seats, their eyes wide at the sudden luxury. For a moment, Naomi allowed herself to breathe, to feel safe again. Evelyn stood in the aisle, pale and rigid. The purser handed her a silver tray with 2 glasses of fresh orange juice, condensation beating on the crystal. The tray trembled in Evelyn's hands as she approached the girls. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Your orange juice." Naomi reached out, steady, composed. "Thank you." It was simple. It was polite, but it cut deeper than any insult. Naomi handed the other glass to Nova, who sipped it slowly, the sweetness grounding her. For the first time all day, her tears stopped. From the galley, Sophia handed Naomi the phone. "Your father's still on the line." Naomi lifted it to her ear. "Daddy, we're sitting down now. We have juice." On the other end, Darius exhaled softly. For him, it was both relief and rage bound together. "Good. Stay strong for your sister. I'll handle the rest." The call disconnected. The weight in the cabin lingered, but the balance had shifted. Evelyn stood frozen, her humiliation complete, while passengers whispered and filmed. Naomi and Nova sat quietly in their oversized seats, sipping orange juice, small queens restored to their throne. But Naomi's thoughts weren't of victory. She looked out the window at the blinking lights on the runway, her heart heavy. She wondered what would come next, and whether her father's power would truly make them safe, or whether it would unleash something even greater than the humiliation they had just endured. The cabin lights flickered as the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received word of a temporary ground stop affecting all global air flights departing this airport. We're waiting for further instructions. Please remain seated and we'll update you shortly." The announcement stirred immediate confusion. Passengers leaned into the aisles, craning to hear better. Whispers darted like sparks across the cabin. "What's a ground stop?" someone asked aloud. "It means no planes can leave. Not a single one." Another voice answered. Why, whether a third passenger wondered, but glancing out the window only revealed a calm winter sky. Evelyn Brooks stood frozen in the aisle, her clipboard limp in her hand. She had heard ground stops before, but always because of storms or FAA orders, never because of a single phone call. The realization clawed at her chest she wasn't fighting an ordinary passenger. She had picked a fight with someone who could paralyze an entire fleet. Naomi sat back in her first-class seat, the glass of orange juice trembling slightly in her hand. She looked at her sister, who had finally stopped crying and now gazed wide-eyed at the spectacle. "Does this mean Daddy did this?" Nova asked quietly. Naomi hesitated. Her heart swelled with pride at her father's power, but beneath that pride ran a shiver of unease. She had never seen his voice, just his voice, move the world like this. She nodded anyway. "Yes, Daddy's making them listen." The whispers grew louder as more passengers realized what was happening. A teenager in the second row typed furiously on his phone, his screen glowing as he posted to social media. Another man muttered, "I knew I recognized that name. Carter. He's the investment guy. Big money." Within minutes, Twitter feeds and TikTok streams were buzzing. All flights frozen at LAX because of two little girls denied boarding. Is this real life? Who is Darius Carter, and how can he shut down an airline inside the operations tower above the airport? Red lights blinked on consoles as dispatchers scrambled to respond. Radios squawked with voices of pilots demanding answers. Flight crews checked their watches. Their schedules shattered. Confusion turned to alarm as word filtered through the order hadn't come from weather, nor from the FAA, but from the very top of the airline after a direct call from Carter himself. Passengers in other terminals grew restless. Children whined as their flight stalled. Business travelers cursed into their phones. The hum of collective frustration swelled into a roar. And at the center of it all sat Naomi and Nova, two 10-year-old girls sipping juice in oversized leather seats, watched by hundreds of strangers who now whispered their names like a legend. For Evelyn, the humiliation was unbearable. She felt the eyes on her, not with the respect she had once commanded, but with judgment, even disgust. The perfect record she had clung to for 3 decades was dissolving before her eyes. Her authority had collapsed, and in its place stood only shame. Sofia Ramirez remained near the girls, her face pale but determined. She had never seen anything like this in her young career. She had heard rumors of wealthy passengers making calls, of executives bending rules for VIPs, but never this. She leaned close to Naomi, whispering, "Your father, he just stopped the whole airport." Naomi's lips curved into the faintest smile. Though her eyes remained solemn, he promised he'd fix it. The purser, a man with salt and pepper hair and a calm professional tone, approached the first-class cabin. He bent low to speak softly to the girls. "You two are safe now. Everything is being handled. Please just relax." His voice was kind, but his eyes flicked nervously toward Evelyn, a silent acknowledgement that this situation had spiraled far beyond normal protocol. In the terminal outside, chaos thickened. Screens flashed, delayed in bright red beside every global air departure. Long lines formed at customer service counters as frustrated travelers demanded answers. News crews dispatched from downtown Los Angeles began racing to the airport. Tipped off by viral posts spreading across social media, back in the cabin, Naomi felt an odd heaviness in her chest. She was no longer invisible. Everyone was looking at her and her sister now, not with suspicion, but with awe, curiosity, sometimes even envy. It felt strange. A few hours ago, she had been humiliated, made to feel like she didn't belong. Now, the entire airline was at a standstill because of her. The shift was dizzying. Nova tugged her arm. "Naomi, are we in trouble, or are we special?" Naomi bit her lip. She wanted to say special. She wanted to bask in the warmth of her father's protection. But the truth knotted inside her. Maybe it was both. Maybe they were both special and in trouble, in ways too complicated for a 10-year-old to untangle. Sophia pulled out her phone again and dialed her supervisor, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Yes, I'm with the Carter twins right now. We're in first class. The ground stop is real. It's everywhere. He actually did it." Her supervisor's reply was muffled, but Sophia's face turned pale. Yes, I understand. I'll keep them safe." She hung up and looked at the girls. "Your father has every executive in this airline on edge right now." The captain stepped out of the cockpit, his face composed but strained. He approached the first-class cabin and crouched near Naomi and Nova. "Your father wants me to let you know that he has spoken with the CEO directly." He said carefully, "Everything is being handled. This flight will wait for you no matter how long it takes. You are our priority." Naomi's throat tightened. The captain's words should have comforted her, but they only made the weight of the moment heavier. Everyone around her seemed to orbit her and Nova now. Every eye, every whisper, every decision revolved around them. Meanwhile, Evelyn lingered near the galley, her hands clenched, her breathing shallow. Her authority had evaporated. The passengers who once obeyed her commands now stared at her like she was the villain of a story they couldn't stop watching. She felt stripped bare, every ounce of control gone. Her career dangling by a thread she could no longer hold. One passenger, a man in business attire, finally spoke aloud, his voice tinged with contempt. "This is what happens when you treat kids like suspects. You humiliated them. And now look, your airline is grounded." Others murmured in agreement. A woman whispered, "She deserves this, every second of it." Evelyn's cheeks burned. She wanted to vanish, to disappear into the sterile walls of the plane, but there was nowhere to hide. Every whisper cut deeper. Every stare reminded her of the moment she had lost everything. Naomi glanced toward her. For a moment, her young eyes softened, filled with something Evelyn hadn't expected: pity. Naomi didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. This woman had once been powerful, and now she was broken. The surreal tension stretched on until Sophia placed the phone back in Naomi's lap. Her father's voice filled the cabin again. "Naomi, Nova, I need to hear from you directly. Are you seated comfortably? Are you safe?" Naomi looked at her sister, who nodded through damp eyes. Together, they answered. "Yes, Daddy, good," Darius said. "Drink your juice. Take a deep breath. The rest is no longer your problem." He disconnected again, but his presence lingered in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and undeniable. The passengers sat in stunned silence. The crew moved cautiously, as if every action now carried the weight of history. Naomi and Nova sipped their juice quietly, their small hands resting together on the armrest. Somewhere above the Atlantic, flights that should have been airborne were still stuck at gates, their engines silent, And inside the fuselage of Flight 27, two little girls sat at the center of it all, too young to fully understand what it meant to have the power of an empire crash down around them. The cabin settled into a strange quiet after Darius Carter's voice faded from the speakerphone. For a moment, everyone just sat there, stunned, as if trying to process the weight of what had just happened. An airline grounded. Two little girls seated like royalty in first class. A veteran flight attendant reduced to trembling silence. But silence never lasts long in the age of smartphones. The teenager in row 2 finished typing furiously and pressed post. A few seconds later, his tweet lit up the internet unreal scene on my flight. Airline tried to deny two little black girls boarding. Then their dad, apparently some billionaire, called in and literally shut down the whole airport until they got seated. Wildest thing I've ever seen. The tweet was a spark tossed into a field of dry grass. Within minutes, likes and retweets climbed into the thousands. Other passengers, emboldened, uploaded short video clips they had captured Evelyn Brooks raising her voice at the gate, Naomi whispering to her father on the phone, Evelyn kneeling in the aisle to apologize, the purser sliding drinks across a silver tray. The videos hit TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, each one edited, captioned, and shared with breathless commentary. By the time the aircraft door closed, hashtags had already begun trending. Joan Carter twins. Airline grounded. Justice in the sky. Naomi didn't yet know that her face, wide-eyed, brave, holding her sister's hand, was flashing across millions of screens. She only knew that everyone around her kept sneaking glances at her row, their expressions a mix of curiosity, sympathy, and awe. Nova leaned close and whispered, "Why is everyone looking at us?" Naomi didn't have an answer. She squeezed Nova's hand and murmured, "Don't worry. Daddy's fixing everything." But Naomi wasn't sure she believed her own words. Across the aisle, Evelyn Brooks sat rigid in a jump seat, her hands folded tightly, her breathing shallow, her thoughts swirled like a storm she couldn't escape. 30 years of spotless service reduced to this. Her name, once anonymous among thousands of flight attendants, now whispered with disdain in this very cabin. And she knew in her bones that the videos were already out there. The internet had teeth, and once it bit, it didn't let go. In the operations center, executives scrambled as their phones buzzed nonstop. Screens displayed the swelling wave of social media outrage. One executive muttered, "This is out of control. If we don't respond, this will sink us." Another barked into a headset, "Get ahead of the narrative, draft a statement, now," but it was already too late. The narrative had written itself. News outlets picked up the story within the hour. The first headline hit a tabloid site. Airline from Hell flight attendant accuses black twins of trafficking. Dad grounds entire fleet in furious call. The article included blurry screenshots from passengers' phones and embedded viral tweets. CNN followed with a more measured headline. But the story was no less sensational. Billionaire investor shuts down, airline over daughter's treatment. Anchors debated the ethics on live television. Panels speculated about racism and corporate overreach, and hashtags scrolled across the ticker at the bottom of the screen. Inside the cabin, Naomi could feel the shift. The whispers weren't just about humiliation anymore. They were about history. She and Nova were no longer simply two children caught in an argument. They were symbols now, unwilling players in a drama that spanned continents. Naomi looked down at her phone. which Sophia had returned to her after the call. A notification banner flashed across the screen. "Your story is trending." She didn't understand what it meant exactly, but she sensed it was bigger than she could grasp, bigger than both of them. Passengers scrolled their own devices, showing each other posts and headlines. A woman leaned over to her husband, whispering loudly enough for Naomi to hear, "Those are the Carter twins. The Carter twins." Nova shrank into her seat, clutching her unicorn tighter. "Naomi, I don't like this," she whispered. Naomi swallowed hard. She wanted to be strong, to shield her sister, but her stomach knotted. She had dreamed of telling their grandmother stories about this trip, stories about planes and London and Christmas magic, not about this, not about strangers knowing their names. Meanwhile, Evelyn's phone buzzed in her pocket. Against her better judgment, she glanced at the screen. Her heart stopped. A message from a friend. "Are you on that flight everyone's talking about? Your pictures all over Twitter." Her hands went cold. She opened the app and saw a blurry but unmistakable image of her face, captioned with venom. "Meet Evelyn Brooks, the flight attendant who humiliated 2 little girls and got an entire airline grounded." Thousands of comments flooded beneath it, each one harsher than the last. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that she had only been following orders, that the system itself had failed her. But none of that mattered now. The internet had chosen its villain, and it was her. Back at the Carter residence, miles away, Darius's communications team was already spinning the story. Draft statements framed him not as a ruthless mogul, but as a protective father. This wasn't about power. One crafted line read, "It was about justice for 2 children who deserved dignity." Darius reviewed the draft silently. He knew the truth was more complicated. His rage hadn't been only about his daughter's dignity, it had been about his pride, his name, his unwillingness to be questioned. But the public didn't need that truth. They needed a hero. On board, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been cleared to depart shortly. Thank you for your patience." Relief rippled through the cabin, though the unease remained. The passengers had witnessed something historic, and they knew it. As the engines roared to life, Naomi pressed her forehead to the cool window, staring out at the runway lights. Nova dozed against her shoulder, exhausted from the roller coaster of emotions. Naomi's mind churned. She thought about her father's voice, the way it had bent reality around them. She thought about Evelyn's face when she was forced to kneel and apologize. She thought about the strangers filming, posting, judging. A part of her was proud. Proud that her father had protected them, that he had made the world see them. But another part whispered questions she couldn't silence. Was this really protection, or was it something else? As the plane lifted into the night sky, phones buzzed with fresh notifications, headlines screamed, hashtags soared, and somewhere in a quiet newsroom in New Jersey, a young journalist named Harper Lee leaned back in her chair, staring at the trending story on her screen. Something about it didn't add up. In the days following the viral storm, the Carter twins' story dominated every news cycle. Talk shows replayed the videos on endless loops, Naomi's steady gaze as she accepted orange juice. Nova's tear-streaked face pressed against her unicorn, Evelyn Brooks kneeling in humiliation. Commentators praised Darius Carter as the embodiment of righteous fatherhood, a man who stopped at nothing to protect his children. The internet was merciless in its applause and in its condemnation. Evelyn's personal details had been unearthed by amateur sleuths within hours. Her Facebook photos, her softball coaching bio, even her street address all dragged into the digital square for strangers to dissect. She became a villain overnight, the stand-in for every petty tyrant who had ever abused their sliver of authority. But in a modest newsroom across the river in New Jersey, Harper Lee stared at the coverage with a frown. Harper wasn't the type to be swept up in viral euphoria. At 32, she had spent her career writing stories that often got buried beneath the noise: local council meetings, community fundraisers, the occasional profile on a retiree with a remarkable hobby. She had learned long ago that the truth was rarely as neat and satisfying as the headlines made it seem. And this story felt too neat. She leaned back in her chair, scrolling through thread after thread. The same narrative repeated itself in slightly different words. Powerful dad defends daughters. Racist flight attendant gets what's coming. Justice served at 30,000 feet. It was cinematic. Too cinematic. Harper's instincts whispered caution. Real life didn't tie bows this tightly. Real life was messy, complicated, tangled in gray. She clicked open a new document on her computer and typed the headline that had been forming in her mind since she first saw the videos. What really happened on Flight 27. The first step was simple. She started calling people. Her initial outreach went nowhere. Global Air Alliance wasn't about to hand her anything. But then she reached out to a retired pilot she had interviewed years earlier for a different story. A man named Tom Halperin, who had flown with the airline for 20 years before retiring. They met at a diner off the interstate, the kind of place where the coffee was endless and the waitresses called you Han. Brenda, sorry. Evelyn wasn't a racist, Tom said after she explained what she was working on. He stirred his mug absent-mindedly. Pain in the ass, sure, rulebook tighter than the Bible, but not racist. She followed orders to the letter. That's who she was. Harper raised an eyebrow. Orders Tom nodded. The airline's been under huge pressure about human trafficking, especially unaccompanied minors on international flights. We all had training on it, memos, bulletins. They told us flat out if the paperwork doesn't line up perfectly, stop the boarding, no exceptions, especially over the holidays when the traffickers slip through the cracks. Harper's pen scratched quickly across her notebook. This wasn't in any of the viral threads. No one was talking about federal investigations or memos. So, you're saying Evelyn might have just been following a directive? I'd bet my pension on it, Tom said. But she didn't have tact. Never did. She probably handled it all wrong, but racist, no. That's not the woman I knew. Harper left the diner with her mind buzzing. The story she had been handed by the internet was already fraying at the edges. Her next call was to a contact in the Port Authority Police Department, someone she had cultivated over years of dull crime blotter reporting. After some coaxing, the officer confirmed what Tom had said yes. There was an active multi-agency investigation into trafficking through Newark and LAX. Airline staff had been instructed to be hyper-vigilant. We told them, the officer said, if you see something off, even a missing document, err on the side of caution. Harper thanked him and hung up. She sat staring at her notes. The pieces didn't fit the viral puzzle. If Evelyn had been responding to a legitimate red flag, then why had Darius Carter presented it as blatant discrimination? She needed more. Through a back channel, Harper eventually connected with a disgruntled former employee of Global Air's IT department. He spoke to her over an encrypted call, his voice low and tinged with bitterness. The system flagged the Carters' booking because the guardianship documents weren't verified yet, he said. Someone uploaded the file that morning, after check-in. It hadn't been processed. The system saw one old form with the mother's signature and one new unverified upload. That combination red flag automatically. Harper's heart raced. So Evelyn wasn't ignoring a verified status. She was reacting to an actual error. Exactly, the man replied. The real mistake wasn't hers. It was Carter's assistant. They dropped the ball on uploading the paperwork, and instead of admitting that, Carter spun it into a discrimination story. Harper leaned back in her chair, the weight of revelation pressing down on her. She thought of the millions of people cheering Darius Carter as a hero, of Evelyn's ruined reputation, of Naomi and Nova unknowingly thrust into the glare of a global spotlight. The truth was darker, messier. The truth was that a billionaire had chosen pride over honesty, and the internet had handed him the narrative he wanted. But could she prove it? Harper stared at the blinking cursor on her screen. Publishing this wouldn't just ruffle feathers. It would be like tossing a grenade into the middle of a victory parade. The Carters were beloved now, symbols of justice. To challenge that narrative was to invite fury, to risk being branded a traitor to the cause of fairness. She closed her laptop for the night, but sleep never came. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Evelyn's trembling apology replay in her mind, seeing Naomi's solemn face in the viral clips. The questions burned inside her. How much truth did the world actually want, and what price would she pay for giving it to them by morning? Harper knew her answer. She opened her laptop again, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to write. On a quiet Tuesday morning, the Essex County Ledger published Harper Lee's article. The headline was plain, almost understated compared to the screaming banners that had come before an agent's ruin, a father's rage, and a missing document the other side of Flight 27. It wasn't written for clicks. It wasn't dressed in sensational adjectives or viral hashtags. It was a meticulous, carefully sourced account of what Harper had uncovered. She laid out the memos from Homeland Security, the directives to airline staff, the red flags coded into Global Air's system. She explained, step by step, how Evelyn Brooks had not fabricated suspicion, but had followed a mandate designed to stop traffickers. And most damning of all, she presented evidence that Darius Carter's guardianship paperwork had only been uploaded hours before the flight and had not yet been verified. The conclusion was unavoidable. The storm that had turned Evelyn Brooks into a global villain and Darius Carter into a celebrated hero had been built not on racism, but on an administrative failure buried in the Carter household. At first, the article seemed like a pebble tossed into the ocean. The national news didn't notice. The hashtags still trended. The Carter twins remained icons of innocence on social media. But then, slowly, the ripples spread. Smaller blogs picked it up. Independent journalists tweeted threads summarizing Harper's findings. One post read, "So, turns out the racist flight attendant was following a DHS directive, and Carter's own assistant forgot to upload paperwork." Let that sink in. Screenshots of Harper's article circulated widely. Her calm, measured tone contrasted starkly with the fury of the viral narrative, and soon larger outlets couldn't ignore it. The New York Times ran a cautious piece, "New details complicate viral airline incident." Cable networks debated the revelation, their panels shifting tone. On one side, Commentators clung to the original story, arguing that even if Evelyn had followed protocol, her lack of compassion justified the backlash. On the other, voices demanded accountability for Carter, accusing him of weaponizing outrage to shield himself from embarrassment. The shift was dizzying. Evelyn Brooks, still in hiding at her small suburban home, watched the coverage with tears in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, the headlines weren't branding her as a monster. Instead, they raised questions. Was she a scapegoat? Had she been sacrificed to protect a billionaire's image? She read Harper's words over and over again, her chest tightening with something she hadn't felt in weeks: vindication. But vindication came late. Her life was already in ruins. Her phone still buzzed with hate mail, her mailbox still stuffed with threats. The neighbors still looked at her with suspicion. The world's attention had shifted, but the scars it left behind on her life remained. Meanwhile, in the Carter household, the mood had darkened. Darius read the Ledger article at his glass desk, the morning sun glinting off the skyline behind him. His jaw clenched as he scrolled, his eyes narrowing at each citation, each undeniable fact. He had underestimated Harper Lee. He had dismissed her as a small-town reporter, not realizing that truth, when told well, didn't need a megaphone to spread. It just needed to be undeniable. His PR team rushed into action, but their statements rang hollow. This is a distraction. One draft read, "The real issue remains the treatment of 2 children." Another attempted to question Harper's credibility, but her article was too well sourced to attack without looking desperate. Investors began calling. A major partnership Darius had been negotiating stalled. Unpredictable. One board member whispered to another. Volatile. The image of a man who could shut down an airline with a single phone call no longer inspired awe. It inspired unease. Naomi noticed the tension first. She saw the way her father stared at his phone longer than usual, the way he snapped at his assistants, the way his voice, once steady and commanding, cracked around the edges. One evening, she found him in his study, the Ledger article open on the desk. She climbed onto the chair across from him, her legs swinging above the floor. "Daddy?" He looked up, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetheart?" Naomi hesitated. She bit her lip, then slid her tablet across the desk. On the screen was an article summarizing Harper's revelations. Beside the text was a photo of her and Nova, their small faces juxtaposed with Evelyn Brooks's weary portrait. The headline read, "The Lie That Grounded an Airline." "Daddy, is it true?" Naomi's voice was small, trembling. "Was it our fault? Did we not have the right papers?" Darius's chest tightened. He had faced down billion-dollar negotiations, cutthroat competitors, hostile governments, but nothing felt as dangerous as his daughter's questioning eyes. He inhaled slowly. "Naomi, listen to me. You and Nova did nothing wrong. Nothing. The mistake was not yours." "But was it yours?" she asked. The question landed like a punch. Darius opened his mouth, but no words came. He had built an empire on control, on certainty, on never admitting weakness. And now, faced with the raw honesty of his child, the truth burned on his tongue. "Yes," he whispered finally. "The paperwork was late. The system flagged it. But that woman still treated you badly. She still humiliated you. And I couldn't let that stand." Naomi stared at him, her young face torn between love and something new doubt. "But you made everyone stop. You made the planes stop. Was that really just for us?" Her voice broke on the last word. Darius reached across the desk, taking her hand. "It was for you," he said softly, desperately, "always for you." But Naomi wasn't sure. For the first time in her life, she saw her father not as a flawless protector, but as a man powerful, yes, but fallible, a man whose pride could ripple outward and change the world, for better and worse. Across the ocean, Harper's article continued to spread. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about billionaires grounding airlines over paperwork. Financial analysts debated whether Darius Carter's reputation for brilliance was really just recklessness in disguise. Hashtags flipped Josh Carter lie, Paperwork Gate, a truth turbulence. The internet had chosen its new villain, and in living rooms across the country, people shook their heads and muttered, "So we destroyed that woman's life because a billionaire forgot to file a form." The outrage that had once burned hot against Evelyn Brooks now cooled into something sharper, colder, and directed squarely at Darius Carter. Naomi felt it too. She sensed the change in the air. The way strangers now whispered differently when they looked at her and Nova. She had wanted the humiliation to end, and it had. But now it was replaced with something far more complicated. The storm wasn't over. It was only changing direction. By spring, the storm that had begun at Gate 47 was no longer just a media spectacle. It was a battlefield. The glossy headlines and hashtags had given way to subpoenas, court filings, and corporate bloodletting. Evelyn Brooks, once too humiliated to leave her home, reemerged quietly with a new weapon, a lawsuit, backed by a team of attorneys funded partly by a GoFundMe organized by her former softball team. Evelyn filed a wrongful termination and defamation claim against Global Air Alliance. The complaint was brutal in its simplicity. She had been following federal directives when she stopped Naomi and Nova Carter from boarding, and the airline had fired her to placate a billionaire investor. Her lawyers didn't stop there. They named Darius Carter in the suit, accusing him of orchestrating a smear campaign that ruined her life. The filing hit like a thunderclap. For weeks, pundits had debated Harper Lee's exposé, but the lawsuit turned debate into war. If Evelyn could prove her case, it meant not only that the airline was culpable, but that Carter himself had manipulated the truth at the expense of a rank-and-file employee. The public reaction was visceral. The same people who had once cheered Carter's righteous fury now flooded comment sections with disgust. So he tanked an airline schedule just to cover up late paperwork, one commenter wrote, and destroyed a woman's career on top of it. Unreal. Investors grew nervous. The stock of Global Air Alliance slipped further. More damning still. Whispers began spreading through Wall Street about Darius himself. Competitors sensed blood in the water. Partners who once courted his approval now stalled calls, hesitant to tie their names to a man whose reputation was curdling into recklessness. Inside Carter Capital, the atmosphere shifted. Senior partners avoided eye contact. Assistants spoke in hushed tones. The aura of invincibility that had once clung to Darius evaporated, replaced by unease. Deals slipped through his fingers. A long-anticipated merger collapsed in the final stages, the board citing concerns about volatility. Everyone knew what that meant. At home, the cracks showed in sharper relief. Naomi watched her father more closely now. She saw the way his phone calls stretched late into the night, his voice taut with desperation rather than command. She saw him pause at the dining table, staring at headlines he couldn't control. One evening, as the twins sat coloring at the kitchen counter, Nova whispered, "Naomi." Daddy looked smaller now. Naomi didn't answer. She glanced at her father, hunched in his study, the glow of the desk lamp casting shadows under his eyes. Smaller. That was exactly the word. For Evelyn, the lawsuit gave her something she hadn't felt in months: agency. Each deposition, each motion filed, was a step toward reclaiming the dignity stripped from her at 30,000 feet. She refused interviews, letting her lawyers speak for her, but privately she began to breathe again. Harper Lee followed every development. She attended court hearings, scribbling notes furiously, her once local story now shaping national conversations. Reporters from major outlets jostled beside her, but Harper kept her focus sharp. For her, this wasn't about fame. It was about finishing what she started, about showing that truth mattered even when it was inconvenient. The hearings were brutal. Airline executives admitted under oath that staff had been warned about trafficking risks, that Evelyn had acted in line with training materials. Internal emails revealed frantic debates about how to handle Carter's rage, culminating in a panicked decision to sacrifice Evelyn's career for the sake of placating their shareholder. Each revelation chipped further at Carter's armor. He had framed himself as a father first, but the courtroom revealed a different picture: a man who had unleashed corporate chaos to mask a clerical mistake. The blow that hurt most wasn't financial, though it was personal. During one cross-examination, Evelyn's lawyer projected Naomi's viral image on a large screen, her small hand gripping Nova's, her wide eyes shimmering with tears. "Mr. Carter, you claim you acted solely to protect your daughter's dignity," the lawyer said. "But is it true that their humiliation was triggered by incomplete guardianship paperwork filed under your responsibility?" The courtroom held its breath. Darius's jaw tightened. His lawyer objected, but the damage was already done. The image lingered, the implication stark. Later that night, Naomi found the clip circulating online. She saw herself on that massive courtroom screen, her pain dissected by lawyers and replayed for strangers. It unsettled her in ways she couldn't name. When she asked her father about it, his face darkened. "People will twist anything," he muttered. "Don't let them make you doubt me." But Naomi already did. Nova, meanwhile, sensed the tension without fully understanding it. She clung harder to Naomi, her once carefree spirit dulled by the constant swirl of headlines and whispers. The Carter twins had become symbols in a war of narratives, and even at 10 years old, they felt the weight. The reckoning spread beyond the courtroom. Richard Hammond, the beleaguered CEO of Global Air Alliance, announced his early retirement, a clear sacrifice to contain the scandal. Shareholders demanded sweeping reforms, including a public apology to Evelyn Brooks. That apology came months later, delivered at a press conference by Hammond's successor. Miss Brooks was acting in accordance with enhanced federal security protocols. The statement read, "Her termination was a regrettable error in judgment made under extraordinary circumstances." Evelyn stood outside the courthouse as cameras flashed, her lawyer at her side. She didn't smile. The vindication was hollow. She had won on paper, but she knew she would never get back the life she once had the trust of passengers, the anonymity of a quiet career. Still, it was a reckoning. Back in the Carter home, Darius sat at his desk long after the twins had gone to bed. The house was quiet, but inside him, the noise was deafening. He thought of Naomi's questioning eyes, of Nova's fragile innocence, of Evelyn Brooks's trembling apology in the aisle of that plane. He had won battles his whole life by wielding power like a sword, but this battle had revealed a truth he couldn't escape. Power could bend reality only for so long before the truth bent it back. When Naomi peeked into his study that night, she saw not the titan of industry who had grounded an airline, but a man weighed down by consequences. And though she didn't have the words for it yet, she understood something new, something painful. Her father's power could protect them from the world, but it couldn't protect him from himself. The reckoning had arrived, and it wasn't finished. By summer, the legend of Darius Carter had inverted. What had once been a tale of righteous vengeance was now a cautionary parable. The same networks that had lionized him in December were running grim exposés. Their Chiron headlines merciless the lie that grounded an airline. On Wall Street, Carter Capital bled trust. The failed merger wasn't an anomaly. It was the first of many. 2 European partners pulled out of pending deals. A sovereign wealth fund withdrew interest entirely, citing concerns about Carter's judgment under stress. Even allies whispered it. Now he's unstable. The financial press pounced. Business journals dissected his fall in long features, describing him not as a visionary but as a man who wielded power recklessly, more concerned with saving face than building futures. Analysts who once praised his boldness now cited ego-driven risk as his fatal flaw. For the first time in decades, Darius Carter wasn't feared. He was doubted. At home, Naomi and Nova watched the transformation with growing unease. The house was still filled with luxury gleaming marble, sweeping glass windows, but it felt different now. The air itself seemed heavier. Assistants came and went with nervous expressions. Meetings stretched late into the night, their muffled arguments bleeding through the study door. Naomi had begun to understand something children rarely notice, that their parents were human. Not perfect guardians, not unshakable titans, human. And humanity, she realized, came with cracks. One evening, she found him sitting alone on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. His phone buzzed again and again beside him, unanswered. For once, the man who commanded empires let the calls ring into silence. "Daddy," she asked softly. He turned, his expression gentler than she expected. "Naomi." His voice carried none of its usual authority. It was simply tired. She stepped closer, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. "Why is everyone so angry now? You were just protecting us." His eyes flickered. For a moment, she thought she saw something raw, shame, maybe, or regret. "People like their heroes simple," he said quietly, "black and white, protector and villain. They don't know what to do with the truth." Naomi hesitated, but the truth was that you forgot the papers. Her words weren't cruel, they were innocent, unvarnished, but to Darius, they cut deeper than any editorial. He exhaled, looking back at the skyline. "Yes, I made a mistake, a small one that turned into something much larger, and instead of admitting it, I fought back with everything I had. Did you regret it?" The silence stretched. "Finally," he said. "Every day." Naomi wrapped the blanket tighter. She wanted to believe him, wanted to erase the questions building inside her. But some part of her understood regret didn't undo what had happened. It didn't erase Evelyn's humiliation, or Nova's tears, or the way the internet had cheered and then turned. Meanwhile, Evelyn Brooks lived in a new kind of quiet. The lawsuit settlement had given her financial security, but it hadn't restored her life. She no longer worked at the airline. She avoided public spaces where she might be recognized. Even at the grocery store, she sensed whispers trailing her. Yet, when Harper Lee visited for an interview, Evelyn surprised her. "I don't want pity," Evelyn said, her hands folded around a mug of tea. "I made mistakes. I wasn't kind enough that day. I let the rules speak louder than compassion. That part is on me." She paused, her gaze steady, but what happened after that wasn't justice. That was theater, and theater destroys people. Harper scribbled the words down. They would become the closing line of her follow-up article, a reflection on how quickly the world burned and how little it cared about the ashes left behind. For Harper, the story had grown beyond anything she imagined. National outlets now quoted her reporting. She was invited onto talk shows, asked to comment on the dangers of viral justice. She accepted reluctantly, always redirecting the spotlight back to Evelyn, to the broader lesson. "We can't keep confusing vengeance with truth," she said during one segment. "We cheer too quickly, and by the time the real story emerges, the damage is done." Back in the Carter home, the damage was personal. Nova had grown clingier, quieter. At school, classmates whispered about the girls whose dad shut down an airport. Some said it admiringly, others mocked. Nova began eating lunch alone, hiding behind her books. Naomi grew protective, stepping into the role of shield with a fierceness beyond her years. But she too felt the weight. When she caught teachers glancing at her with curiosity, when she overheard parents whispering at drop-off, she knew their family name was no longer just theirs. It was a headline, a cautionary tale. Darius noticed it too. One night, as he tucked Nova into bed, she looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, are we bad?" The question cracked something inside him. He smoothed her hair back, forcing a smile. "No, baby girl, you are good. You are the best thing in my life." But later, alone in his study, the words replayed like a torment. His daughters, the ones he had claimed to protect, now carried the shadow of his choices. His empire could survive lost deals. His reputation could endure bad press. But the look in his daughter's eyes, the flicker of doubt, the sting of inherited shame that was the kind of fall no amount of money could repair, and still the world mocked him. At a charity gala in Manhattan, a rival financier raised a glass with a smirk. "Careful what paperwork you forget, or we'll all be grounded again," he joked loudly, sending ripples of laughter through the circle. Darius forced a smile, but inside he burned. Once, men had whispered his name with fear. Now they laughed. Naomi saw it too, the way her father's jaw tightened, the way his shoulders stiffened. She realized something chilling. The world didn't just want to see her father humbled. It wanted to see him broken, and piece by piece, it was getting what it wanted. The summer air in New York had grown heavy with the scent of rain and exhaust as Darius Carter stepped into the courtyard of the National Financial Forum. He had accepted the invitation reluctantly, knowing it was his first public appearance since the collapse of Carter Capital's merger. Cameras clustered at the entrance, flashing with merciless attention. Naomi and Nova had been hesitant to attend. They had wanted to hide from the world, to avoid the whispers and stares that had followed them since the incident. But their father insisted. "You need to see me stand," he said quietly the night before. "Even if the world is against me, you must see me finish this." Harper Lee had also been invited to cover the event. She arrived early, notebook in hand, sensing that this would be the story that defined the entire saga not just for Darius Carter, but for the conversation about justice, power, and the viral fervor that had consumed everyone. The forum hall shimmered with opulence and authority. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant dresses moved in calculated patterns, exchanging polite smiles and sharp glances. Yet, beneath the surface, tension lingered like a storm cloud. Everyone knew the man at the center of the collapse was here, and the room waited with bated breath for either redemption or disaster. Darius stepped to the podium. The applause was polite but hollow, a few scattered claps that carried more obligation than admiration. He adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. For a moment, silence wrapped the room, heavy and almost suffocating. "Good evening," he began. His voice was measured, surprisingly calm, a quiet strength beneath the tremor that betrayed his nerves. "I stand here not as the man you once knew, but as a father, as a professional, and as someone who has made mistakes. Big mistakes. Mistakes that affected not just me, but my daughters, my colleagues, and the public who trusted me." Naomi and Nova sat together in the front row, gripping each other's hands. Naomi's eyes never left her father. She noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, the flicker of vulnerability in his posture, and felt a mix of pride and sorrow. This was the man she had grown up idolizing, and yet he was human. Darius continued, recounting the incident on the airplane. He described the mix-up with the paperwork, the escalation, and the moment he had realized that his decisions, fueled by pride and fear, had spiraled out of control. He spoke of Evelyn Brooks, acknowledging her professionalism, her humanity, and the unnecessary humiliation she had endured. By the time he paused, the room was quiet. Even the most cynical investors and journalists were leaning in, listening. Harper Lee scribbled furiously, sensing the rare vulnerability of a man who had rarely been human in public view. "Power," Darius said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of experience, "is a dangerous thing. It can protect, and it can destroy. I used it recklessly. I allowed fear, ego, and anger to dictate my actions. And in doing so, I forgot the most important lesson of all compassion." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. For the first time, Darius Carter had admitted fault not as a statement for damage control, but as truth. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. She'd always known her father as strong, unbreakable, untouchable, but watching him own his mistakes, she realized strength wasn't invincibility. Strength was courage, even in humiliation, to face the consequences of one's actions. Nova leaned against her sister, whispering, "He's really sorry?" Naomi nodded, unsure if words could fully capture the weight of what she felt. The moment of climax came unexpectedly. A reporter from a rival network stood up, voice sharp and accusatory. "Mr. Carter, can we trust anything you say? You shut down airports, disrupted thousands of lives, and yet you now claim humility. Why should we believe you?" Darius's face did not flinch. He inhaled slowly and responded with a quiet intensity. "Because humility is not measured by whether others believe you. It is measured by whether you acknowledge the harm you caused and work to make it right. I cannot undo what happened. I cannot erase the humiliation, the fear, or the anger, but I can learn. I can change, and I can teach my daughters to understand the cost of power and the necessity of responsibility." The reporter faltered, caught off guard by the calm honesty. For a moment, the room held its collective breath. Then, slowly, a few scattered claps began, building until even the most skeptical faces softened. After the forum, Naomi and Nova accompanied their father outside. The city had begun to drizzle, and umbrellas unfolded like a forest of black against the gray skyline. Darius looked at his daughters, seeing them not as extensions of his legacy, but as individuals who had their own perception of right and wrong. "Girls," he said softly, "I hope today you saw something important. Not just about me, but about life. Power can protect, but it can also blind us. Fear can guide, but it can also mislead. And pride can make a man forget the people he loves most." Naomi nodded, tears falling freely now. "We saw, Daddy, we understand, and we forgive you." Nova hugged him tightly, whispering, "Just don't forget us again." For Darius, it was a moment heavier than any business victory, any headline, any fortune. It was the reckoning of the human soul, the public collapse, and the intimate recovery of trust. Evelyn Brooks, watching from afar in her modest apartment, felt a quiet relief. Justice had taken a complex form, one that did not fit neatly into courtrooms or viral stories. She could finally move forward without hatred coloring her steps. Harper Lee penned her final piece on the saga, capturing not just the viral scandal, but the redemption of truth, the humanization of power, and the delicate balance between accountability and compassion. The story closed with a reflection that would resonate long after that even the mightiest can fall. And in falling, they may find the most profound lessons. Strength was not in dominance, it was in courage, humility, and the willingness to confront oneself without excuses. As the rain drizzled down the polished sidewalks of Manhattan, the Carter family walked together, their hands intertwined, their hearts heavier yet lighter. The city moved around them, indifferent, bustling, relentless but inside. They had found a measure of clarity. They had seen the fall, endured the chaos, and emerged with a new understanding of love, power, and resilience. The airplane incident, the viral outrage, the legal battles, all of it had been a storm. But storms, they realized, were not only destructive, they cleansed, revealed, and reminded humanity of its fragile, beautiful nature. As the storm of headlines, viral outrage, and public judgment finally settles. The story of Naomi and Nova Carter leaves a lingering question. What would you do if your world was turned upside down in an instant? Their journey, though rooted in a plain cabin and a tense confrontation, is a mirror reflecting society's struggle with bias, authority, and empathy. Darius Carter's fight was not just to protect his daughters, but to confront his own flaws, showing that true strength is found not in dominance, but in accountability, humility, and love. Evelyn Brooks' grace under pressure reminds us that integrity often carries a quiet power, even when misunderstood, and the twins Naomi and Nova emerge not as victims, but as witnesses to the complexities of human nature, courageously navigating a world that can be both cruel and redemptive. Stories like this challenge us, make us reflect, and sometimes inspire us to do better. They remind us that discrimination in any form leaves scars, but truth, compassion, and resilience can heal and transform. If this story moved you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that touch the heart and provoke thought. Stay tuned for our next video where courage meets consequence, and the human spirit is tested in unexpected ways.